Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the Monday show with me, Andrew Musgrove. And I'm joined by Northeast journalist Mark Carruthers, who, of course, has been on the podcast over the last few weeks. And he is now officially the new co-host of the Monday show. I hope you don't mind me saying, big shoes to fill with Aaron Stokes leaving. But you up for the challenge?
A little man to fill big shoes doesn't sound like a good combination, does it? Yeah, very much so. Obviously, an interesting time for the club. Exciting times ahead, and joining at the perfect time, I guess, with 2 weeks left in the transfer window. So I'm certain we'll have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, well, we've made our signing of the summer transfer window. And I know we said goodbye to Aaron last week on the Monday show, and he's now put his news officially out on X. But again, I just want to pay huge thanks to Aaron for helping to make the podcast what it is. And once again, I'm sure you guys will also pop a nice comment or two into the comment box. As always, this episode is sponsored by NORD VPN. You can click the link in the podcast description box to get an exclusive discount on your NORD VPN plan. One subscription can be used across 10 devices. It's well worth your time to sign up. Not only supporting the podcast, but you keep yourself safe and secure when browsing on public Wi-Fi. So on the train, on the bus, in the shopping centre, wherever, you've got that added extra element of security. And if you're going abroad as well, you can switch your location back to the UK and make sure you never miss your favourite UK TV shows by keeping up to date with your streaming services. So click the link, support the podcast, and keep yourself secure. Right, Mark? Plenty to talk about. Transfers will come on to the agenda later in the show, ladies and gents. But let's first off start with the first game of the new campaign. Newcastle headed down to Villa Park, a place where they have a horrendous record, if we're being truthful, and came away probably thinking they should have won the game. It was 0-0 in the end, and Aston Villa, of course, had to deal with having a lesser man due to Konza being rightly sent off midway through the second half. But despite the disappointment from some, the frustration maybe, if you'd offered me a point prior to kickoff, I would have taken it. So I've got no complaints that it's come my way.
It's kind of circumstances, though, isn't it? Because I'd be the same. You would have taken a point. You would have taken a clean sheet. You would have taken what I thought was still a largely positive performance, but at the same time, with the red card, it also has to go down as a missed opportunity. And I hope that doesn't come across as negative. I think it's just simple facts. It's, you play against 10 men for as long as Newcastle did, and you can't find a way through, then I think it is a missed opportunity. But at the same time, I think the narrative was already in place before the game, I guess, that Newcastle would struggle to find the net because of the Alexander Isak situation. That said, I actually thought the front three looked good. I thought they looked lively. I thought Anthony Gordon did well. I don't think we can say it's an unfamiliar role for him because he's done it before. He did it for England under 21s when they won the European Championship. So there were positives to take from that. I think it was just that kind of, and I think Alan Shearer made this point on Match of the Day. There was a couple of times where that striker's instinct, the natural striker's instinct, was just a little bit lacking. There was a cross came in from the left where I think he could have been on it in the 6-yard box if he had those sort of natural striker's instincts. But again, I think that, I'll say it again, there were more positives than negatives from the performance.
I think Dan Burns said after the game that he'd rather be in those positions, missing those chances than not creating them.
Absolutely.
Which was a really good point to be made. And on Anthony Gordon, look, I've been his biggest critic at centre forward, but not necessarily on him personally, but just because the situation in which he's having to be deployed there. It's not really fair on him. It's not really fair on Eddie Howe. And obviously this time around, it's due to Alexander Isak refusing to play. But let's be honest, this has been an issue that was there last season, and it hasn't been dealt with. But the point on Anthony Gordon is that he's the prime example that Alexander Isak should have followed when it comes to a speculative summer. Will he or won't be a Newcastle United player? That was what we had to deal with last summer. Of course, he would have been interested in a move to Liverpool. Not only can you win things, he's from the area, reportedly a boyhood fan. And yes, he was distracted. And yes, he took a little while to get back to his best. But he never downed tools. And now who's to say that the interest was as far along as it is with Alexander Isak? But the point being, he could have forced something. Yeah. He didn't. And look at him now. He's the shining example of how to be the ultimate professional. And the bottom line is that while he's got that shirt on his arse, he's given his all, and that's more than can be said for Alexander Isak.
It is. I kind of feel as if we're seeing a bit of a rejuvenated, reinvigorated Anthony Gordon this year. He obviously had a tough year the year before when he's obviously played for England at the European Championships and had a really hectic season with Newcastle and or second half of the season with Newcastle, and then was brilliant for spells in the season before last. Candy was off the boil a bit last year. You do wonder, as you say, if there was a bit of a hangover from the Liverpool situation. But now that's cleared and there's kind of a refocused and re-energized Anthony Gordon. That can only be a positive for Newcastle United. I think, yeah, you're right, the Isak situation, his conduct, and it's really difficult because we're only hearing one side of it. But at the same time, I don't think there's a lot Alexander Isak could come out and say where you go, actually, no, that kind of, we understand why you've acted in the way you have in that manner. So, yeah, you should maybe look at Gordon, who didn't seem to agitate, certainly didn't go as nuclear as Isak has, and is looking at the season with a real positive now and will be, without question, one of Newcastle United's key players this year.
Most certainly so. And he had a couple of chances in the first half. There was one header in particular, and again, it goes down to being that kind of striker with that natural instinct, which he doesn't have. But you can't fault his effort. You know, he stood up when he's been needed. He's kind of obviously taken the opportunity that's been handed to himself, hasn't kicked up a fuss, and just got on with it. And look, it's not going to work. He's not going to be a world-class striker, no matter how hard he tries now, how much effort he puts in. But he's there when Newcastle United need him, and hopefully, though, not there on Monday night against Liverpool, which we'll talk about in a moment because we're going to talk about strikers. Anthony Elanga had arguably the best chance, you would say, against Aston Villa, played through. The keeper, Bezart, made what I think was a good save. A lot of people are saying Anthony Elanga should have scored, but I've looked at it more than half a dozen times, and I think actually he's done pretty much everything he could have done. Down on the right, comes in. I mean, what more can he really do in that situation? Should he have scored?
Yeah, I mean, when you're a top-level footballer going through and goal, then I think the odds are in your favour. But at the same time, my criticism of it would be that I think the save is almost routine. I don't think he's made the keeper work hard enough. He's got the shot on target, admittedly, but yeah, I think he should score. But I mean, look, Anthony Elanga is a really good signing for Newcastle. You could see in spells in the game what he gives them. There's more thrust down the right hand side. I'm really excited by, and again, it's kind of hard to avoid transfers, isn't it? But when a striker does come in, the thought of Elanga, Gordon, and a striker, is very exciting. And I think what we're going to see at St James's Park this year is more clubs will come and sit in and try and protect. I don't think it'll happen next Monday night. I'll say that because I don't think Liverpool have really got that in them. But some clubs, some sides will come to St James's. Newcastle need that sort of pace, that power, that unpredictability in the forward line to break through that.
A lot of people have said the one question they've got over Anthony Elanga is that he's better for a team on the counter attack, and we saw that against Aston Villa. That the Konsa sending off, for example, he's instrumental in getting the ball, feeding Gordon, and the foul happens. Are you concerned about that? I think the pace, although okay, it might be more favourable in a counter-attacking side, it works wherever. If you've got a pacey winger, it doesn't matter whether you've got the majority of the ball or you've got 40% possession. The pace is what matters.
Well, I think if you look at the way Forest set up, they were set up on the counter-attack. There weren't many games where they went and took the initiative. Whereas Newcastle will have to this year, I think, particularly at St James's. So I think you'll see both sides of Elanga. And look, he's kind of got a little bit of everything to his game. And you look at these statistics he racked up last season at Forest. He was a massive part of what they did. Now, if he comes into a confident, forward-thinking, attack-minded Newcastle side, there's no reason, and again, and I said this last week, and I'll go back to it, working under one of the best coaches in the English game, there's no reason why he can't improve even further and become an even more rounded player.
I think that's exactly what we're hoping of him. And of course, Eddie Howe has got that kind of history of turning players into something special. And like you say, I'm looking forward to seeing what the future holds for Elanga. But there was a lot of negativity on social media after the game. And on one hand, I think it's people looking to scapegoat. It used to be Sean Longstaff, but of course he's no longer here. Used to be Miguel Miron, no longer here. I was just so annoyed and frustrated at some of the comments that I was seeing from fans who I believe are genuine fans as well. Look, everyone's got their opinion, and you can say quite rightly he should have scored. He should have put that chance in the back of the net. That is fine, no issue with that. But it was comments like, "We've just signed Miguel Almiron again," or he's not worth the price tag, or it was just some really heavy criticism. First game in the Premier League for Newcastle United. He played well. He looked threatening. Okay, he missed a couple of chances. That happens. My biggest point is this is Newcastle United, and I go back to the point I made about Anthony Gordon. Sorry, Anthony Elanga wants to be here. He's given us all to play for Newcastle United, and more than ever at this time, that should be valued.
I think it's kind of born out of frustration, isn't it? That that sort of reaction and a need, a hunger for Newcastle United to do well and get the season off to a good start after what has been, I should say, another really difficult summer for the club. So I kind of get it. I get the criticism to an extent, but I do think it is slightly harsh. I thought his performance was a decent performance. I don't think it was spectacular. I don't think it was poor. I just think it was an average performance. But I think this is his first game playing in a side that is still kind of rocking from what's going on within the club, within the situation with Alexander Isak. And I think once he gets to St. James's, once he's got that crowd behind him and fully behind him, and I think he's going to be one of those players that, and I mean, I remember seeing Dave Ginola having this and players like that, where Laurent Robert, when he got the ball, and it was like, right, what's going to happen now? And you can sense that electricity in the stadium. I think he'll be the one in this side, a little bit like when Gordon gets the ball out wide as well, by the way, where we'll just wait and see what happens, and there'll be that anticipation, and that's when you'll see him when he really becomes a Newcastle United player, when he deals with that and thrives on that sort of excitement and that energy.
And I think it'll start on Monday night against Liverpool, and of course there will be a match preview with John Gibson later in the week. But you watched their performance against Bournemouth, and okay, they won. But if you're a winger, you're licking your lips at the prospect of facing Liverpool because their back line was so out of sorts. Centre backs look aging. I mean, the ironic thing is, if you're Alexander Isak, you're probably licking your lips at the prospect of facing Liverpool centre backs.
Well, he normally does anyway, doesn't he?
Do you know what I mean? But anyway, that's for later in the week. But yeah, I thought Anthony Elanga put in a decent enough shift. There was more positives than there were negatives. And I just say to those who really went in hard on him, just support your players, especially those that actually want to be here, like he does. We've got the centre backs that I want to talk about now, because I thought they were absolutely superb against Aston Villa. Bearing in mind you've got Sven Botman and Malik Thiaw on the bench, looking to break into that starting 11. You've got real competition now, and what you've got is two old heads who, with a majority partnership for last season, been absolutely brilliant. I mean, you look at the stats, and it was a competition between Dan Burn and Fabian Schär for man of the match. Fabian Schär got it due to Ali McCoyster putting the vote in, but it seemed like TNT wanted Dan Burn to get it, and you can see why. The stats, right? 7 out of 11 duels won for Dan Burn, 8 clearances. Fabian Schär, 8 out of 13 duels won, 6 out of 6 aerial duels won, 6 clearances, 4 interceptions. So Fabian Schär's stats slightly better, but put those two together, and you've got a partnership there. Now, okay, it's one game, first game of the Premier League season. It's a long campaign ahead. These two are obviously nearing the end of their career rather than just starting out. But what a way to really send a message, a friendly message, to Malik Thiaw and Sven Botman to say, yeah, you guys might be the future, but right now we're the present.
And we spoke about it last week, didn't we, when we said, I hate how much we are referring back to Isak, but it's kind of unavoidable. When we spoke about that situation clouding the kind of how good Newcastle are as a squad, as a side, and mentioned the partnership of Schär and Burn. And I don't think we saw anything on Saturday we didn't expect from them. We know what they're going to do. We know Schär's going to be unbelievable on the ball, that he's going to ping these crossfield passes, that he's going to, put his head in where it hurts. We know Dan Burn's going to give blood for the cause. We know he's going to do everything that he did. But again, at the same time, I think I said about Thiaw and Botman, they could be Newcastle's centre-back partnership for the next 10 years. Well, maybe they might have to wait a little bit to become that, because but actually what I will say is I think we can no longer talk about Newcastle United as a starting 11. We have to talk about the squad now, because the squad is becoming better. When you look at the fullback situation, there are fullbacks that can play in both positions. You have experience, you have reliability, you have youth, you have exuberance. In midfield, that's been boosted now with the arrival of Jacob Ramsey, and there's 5 good options in there now. Out wide, there's 4 good wingers. The only situation, or the goalkeepers as well, the only place where there isn't competition is the thing we keep coming back to, which is up front. But I think in terms of that centre-back partnership, I wouldn't be overly shocked if we don't see Botman and Thiaw as a partnership until the first Carabao Cup tie, which I think is in late September, or mid-September. So that wouldn't surprise me if Botman and Schär have the shirts. They're in possession, unless something dramatic happens. then there may be a chance for the other two to wait until that Carabao Cup game.
Right, it's going to be interesting to see what happens again on Monday against Liverpool, where the attacking line is slightly more potent than what Villa have got. Although Villa are a very good side and at home, where their record is unbelievable. I mean, they'd won the last 8 going into that game in all competitions, and Ollie Watkins had a storming pre-season, so I was a little bit worried. But they managed to keep a decent enough attacking line very quiet, and that's something there that the Coin of Fraser said in the comments as well. I mean, it's really interesting with those guys. I think Dan Burn looks like he's done a lot of work in the gym over the summer. He looks a bit leaner, a bit stronger as well. And I just think the fact that they've risen to the challenge of a fit Sven Botman and the new arrival is absolutely wonderful for Eddie Howe, because that's what you want in your squad. You want that competition.
The one thing with Burn and Shaw, and I think this should be pointed out, is that throughout their career, they've always been doubted. So you look at Burn from minute one, when he was released by Newcastle and had to prove himself at Darlington whilst working at Asda. And then every club he's gone to, even when he came to Newcastle, there were doubts. With Shaw, he obviously had the situation that when Steve Bruce was in charge, when he fell out of favour, I think everyone connected with the club expected him to leave then. But he's come back and proven himself under Eddie Howe. For me, and I'm not shy in saying this, I think Shaw is one of the best pound-for-pound signings the club's made. And I don't just mean recently, I mean in the history. I mean, 3.5 million, 3 million for an established international who has given them so many good years of service and had so many iconic moments. I think we shouldn't be surprised that the two of them are shown exactly what they're made of. The fact that they played such a key part in the Carabao Cup win, in qualifying for the Champions League. They're a good partnership. There's balance, left foot, right foot. They can both, if one of them's got a weakness, the other one is one of their strengths. So there's a lovely balance to the pairing. But yeah, they are going to have to keep at the top of their game, because there are two younger pretenders to get in there. But this is what Newcastle United need, and I keep going back to it. They ain't going to be successful across the board. They ain't going to challenge for major honours unless they have a squad, and that's what they're building towards now.
100%. And we may have seen one of Fabian Schär's beautiful finishes had Dan Burn not gotten away from him and actually defended Aston Villa's line for them, which was wonderful from Dan Burn, because that was probably going to end up in the back of the net. I'm glad he covered a little chuckle afterwards about it. But yeah, brilliant from both Dan Burn and Fabian Schär. As we said there, obviously, Konza got the red card. From that point on, you would hope Newcastle United can take advantage of that, but they just couldn't manage it. And there were times in the second half, more often before the dismissal, where actually Aston Villa, especially as soon as after the interval, they actually came out with something to prove, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, not being able to take advantage, would it be cruel to say maybe that's where Jacob Ramsey would have come on if the deal was done? Where do you sacrifice a Joe Linton and put him in that sort of left-sided midfield role and get him to try and unlock the defence and drive at the defence? And maybe that is one of the key factors in the Ramsey signing, is it's someone who can kind of be a bit more forward-thinking in midfield. Because, I mean, Bruno, I personally think can play as a 10 if that's what Newcastle played or how they played. Toney can also do that, but he seems settled in this sort of deep line role, and we know what Joe Linton's going to do. But maybe that is what was lacking in midfield, just that little bit of creativity, that little bit of threat going in at the final third, a way of unlocking defences rather than just focusing out wide. So yeah, as I said earlier, I think it's a missed opportunity. Villa, their game was kind of set, wasn't it? I think they were caught between a rock and a hard place at first. You go and attack Newcastle and risk being hit on the break. But then as a home team, you should really take the initiative. Whereas the red card gives them clarity, and that's always a dangerous thing for a side. So then it was a case of, can we bank in, can we defend, and then hit Newcastle on the break? And there was a couple of dicey moments for Newcastle. So I think that's why that is basically what the red card gave Villa. Yeah,
there were a few moments, and there was one in particular where Newcastle had gone forward and they lost the ball, and suddenly the midfield was so out of position. I mean, you saw Toney getting back, thankfully, what an engine he's got on him. But it's that gap, isn't it? When you play that risky game to a certain extent, where you go pile forward, and then if you don't get a goal, I mean, if you do that on Monday night, if Liverpool manage to catch out that way, then you are going to unfortunately get punished. We're going to dive into the comments now. Thank you to everyone who's watching live on YouTube. If you're watching later, do dive in as well and let us know your thoughts on anything that we've spoken about now. Loads of comments are about Yoane Wissa, which we'll talk about in a moment, particularly about walking away, which I think will be the general consensus. People complimenting Gordon's performance. Sean says Isak has been so respectful. So disrespectful the way he's treating the club, Eddie the owners, his teammates, and the fans. I hope he does go. He doesn't deserve to wear the shirt again. Again, lots of comments along those lines. Graham says, barring the strikers, the squad is looking strong. And the best part for me on Saturday was the control we had for most of that game against a very decent side. And if you add in Jacob Ramsey, who obviously couldn't play, the actual depth that's been missing is starting to show.
Just on the control comment, I think it's absolutely spot on, because I thought in games last season, even when Newcastle were winning, so Brentford at home is the example I always go back to, where they won the game 2-1, but I never felt as if Newcastle were in control of the game. And I think that happened a lot last season. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was just a lack of balance or I don't know why it happened, but maybe it's a confidence factor. Maybe it was the uncertainty around certain players. But I thought on Saturday, for large parts of particularly the first half, Newcastle controlled the tempo, they controlled the pace of the game, they controlled everything about it. And bizarrely, maybe lost a little bit of it after the red. But again, I think that goes back to the clarity that Villa were given in their setup and how they would play. So I think that was a real positive. Look, I'm not going to say it was a 9 or 10 out of 10 performance. It wasn't. It was, it was a 7 or an 8. But it was promising, and I think they put foundations in place for how they'll build on that going forwards. Hopefully starting with a good result on Monday night.
And on the depth as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think when you look at the squad, I mean, there's a number of good goalkeepers within the squad. I know obviously John Ruddy's going to be, by the look of it, third choice. But when you look at, when was the last time Newcastle had 2 England goalkeepers? And I was kind of surprised and unsurprised that Pope started. I thought maybe with Ramsdale coming in on loan, he would be handed the glove straight away, because it's a new signing, and why would you make a loan signing that's not really going to play? And I'm not saying he's not going to play, but he didn't play on Saturday. And Pope, I think in pre-season, didn't really tell us anything we didn't know about Nick Pope. There are questions about his distribution, but we know he's a very good shot stopper. So you're not really going to argue with either of those two players. I mentioned about the fullbacks, and I know we're going to talk about the 21s later, but obviously Lewis Hall was on the bench on Saturday and played 90 for the under-21s on Sunday. So you'd think would come back into contention for Monday. Again, I go back to what I said last week about the 2 younger fullbacks could genuinely be the fullback partnership for the next decade. So their time as a partnership will come. There's options right the way across the back 4 now with the Malik Diaw addition. In midfield, they are, I say stacked, but we know the main 3, Toney, Bruno, and Joe Linton, were one of the best midfields in the Premier League last season. You've now got 2 younger options in there. I'm not going to go back over what I said about Lewis Miley, because I think everyone knows how much I admire him as a player. Out wide, you've got 4 very good wingers with youngsters behind them. It is just that striker position. And if Newcastle can bring in 2, if and when Isak goes, I still think there's an argument to say they need 3, but that's just me. But if you're going to play one up front, you do at least need 2. And hopefully if that happens before the 1st of September, Newcastle will have one of the strongest squads they've had in a long time. I think on the 3rd striker, I think Gordon will be that 3rd.
Yeah, well, again, we are going to talk about that later in the show. Don't worry, gents. What else are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about, actually, some comments there about Anthony Elanga and Leslie saying lots of decent balls in, just needed that striker. So I'm not concerned about Elanga whatsoever. And thankfully, a lot of you chaps are agreeing. And Malcolm says, I wouldn't criticise any of the players for the performance on Saturday. We're a couple of strikers away from a great season. Gary says there's always negativity on social media from some sections of the fan base. We seem to have some who will always criticize, especially the manager. Right. Let's talk about Alexander Isak. And obviously he wasn't there. We don't need to go over that. He's refusing to be part of the team, or anyhow doesn't think he's fit enough in terms of maybe that mental approach to things. Maybe he's going to be a disruptive influence. Who knows? Don't particularly care at this point, because I've already made my bed. There's no way back for him. What has changed, and you spoke to me off air about this, is kind of the words around it. And I was particularly surprised at the post-game interviews of Anthony Gordon and Dan Burn, where for me, that is the final nail in the coffin of Alexander Isak at Newcastle United. And yet I say that with the full knowledge that he may actually still be a Newcastle United player come the 1st of September, because Newcastle are not going to be daft enough to cash in without two strikers coming in, which at the moment doesn't look likely.
I think the language being used in the last 4 or 5 days in particular tells you a lot about the playing squad and the manager. And I just want to make a point on the manager. If there was one person who's come out of this situation with credit, it is Eddie Howe. And it shows how lucky Newcastle United are to have such a respectful, hard-working and honest man in charge of the club. Now, the way he's dealt with this situation, where, let's be honest, every single press conference, every briefing that he's had, it's been the main topic of conversation. Yet every time he's dealt with it, even protected Alexander Isak in the first few weeks. And sort of, it would have been very easy for a manager to go in on him, but he didn't. He held back. He was respectful. And it's only in the last few days, there was a comment, I think, on Friday in his pre-match press conference where he said, we want players who want to play for the football club. And that was kind of the first time where he's really sort of made a pointed comment. The Dan Burn one about nobody gets anywhere on this side on their own, that felt pointed. Anthony Gordon talking about the situation openly, that felt pointed as well. So I just wonder if it's the first time where the narrative is sort of changing from, look, there might be a possibility it could be reintegrated. I personally don't think he should be. I don't think he can be. I saw a lot of talk in the coverage of the game on Saturday of if he scores a couple of goals, Newcastle fans will accept him back. I'm not so sure now because, look, I've been watching Newcastle for, I'm going to give away my age here, but nearly 40 years now. I know that's hard to believe, by the way. But it's always a case of all Newcastle fans want is someone who's going to run 90 minutes for the side, give everything, appreciate what they do for the community, appreciate what they do for the supporters. And look, not every player is going to fall in love with the club. You can't think that's going to happen. Players aren't built like that. But just give everything, And the minute you show that sign of that you don't want to play for the football club, for me, you're done, no matter how talented a player you are. And I think that's where we're at with Isak. And I think there's a sense of, again, if you go back to earlier in the summer when the situation first arose, I think Kieran Trippier said, my phone's always on for Alex if he wants to chat. There was another couple of players, and Bruno said something similar about, we hope he stays. But I feel as if there's been a shift in the narrative now, and I think there's players now accepting, look, this can't go on. So, look, either way, we're going to find out in the next 2 weeks. But for me, I don't think he should play for the club again.
Les says it's not just the lads' interviews, it's the tone of the welcome videos has sent a clear message, in her opinion, as well. It's interesting, though, because obviously we are Newcastle United fans, our friends and families are Newcastle United fans. We speak to you guys watching and listening. You can see it on social media. I'm yet to meet a Newcastle United fan who begrudges Alexander Isak the ambition and desire and want to move to Liverpool. I'm yet to find someone who is angry at that part of the saga. Everyone is angry at the fact that he's just derailed Newcastle's summer and start to the season. Now, obviously, it came out a couple of weeks ago that reportedly he had told Eddie Howe and the club that he wanted to leave. The claims were that he told them well before the end of the season, then once again at the end of the season. And Liverpool fans ran with that, and it was taken as gospel, like it was the truth. And I had my doubts. Eddie Howe has been asked about it as well, and he was talking, Eddie Howe, I think the interview that took place was after the game with Aston Villa. Let me just find the quotes and read you what he had to say, Mark, and you guys watching this can get involved as well. So, asked about that claim that Alexander Isak had told Newcastle United prior to the end of the season, and then again after they'd qualified for the Champions League, after that result against Everton at St James's Park on the last day of the season, Howe said, "Trust me, when that final whistle went, Isak leaving was the furthest thing from my mind. It was just a feeling of relief because we were hunting that prize all season. We were in it and around it after a really good run in December. I was not thinking of any individual in that moment, so I can't really give an answer on that." Now, he doesn't flatly rule out the fact that conversation happened, but he also doesn't say it happened. And given how honest he is, as you've just discussed, I feel like if that conversation had happened, again, we don't know for certain, but if it had happened, I feel he would have said, Yeah, okay. Because I don't get the point why you would lie in this situation. Okay, if the conversation did happen, the club don't come out looking at their best because there's a lack of planning, etc., etc. But there's just something in me. He didn't look like a player who'd had that conversation, celebrating with his teammates after the Everton game. We don't know for certain, but I'm doubtful.
Yeah, I think I would be as well. I think maybe there were murmurings because of the contract situation and the fact that negotiations that were reportedly promised didn't take place. So you could sense there maybe is some reasoning behind some dissatisfaction from the player and his agent, who seems to have gone a little bit under the radar on all of this. But I think, yeah, I mean, again, Eddie, there could be a little bit of protection going on there as well, which again speaks volumes for his integrity. I really feel for him, honestly, I do, because I feel as if he's in a no-win situation here. I think the club need to back him and try and get those, 2 strikers in and just allow everyone to move on from what has been a horrendous situation. The one thing I would say, you mentioned about understanding why he wants to go to Liverpool, and I do get that to an extent, but I'll switch this and I'll look at it if I'm Liverpool, and there's one way to say it shows how much he wants to play for our club. But at the same time, what's to say 2 years down the line, Real Madrid don't come in and you're in exactly the same situation? So he's playing a very dangerous game, Alexander Isak, where his reputation has taken a real hit, because I think he came across as ultra professional, and again, I'm not going to say that he loved Newcastle United or anything like that, but I do think that his reputation has to be taking a hit. And again, we'll talk about narratives, and across the media, in terms of national media, there seems to be a little change in people's views on Isak, where it's gone from, well, it's Liverpool, he wants to play for Liverpool, he wants to win the Champions League, the Premier League, blah, 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 all this sort of stuff, to recently, and it's with some people who are very Liverpool focused as well in the press, by the way, who are now criticising his conduct and the way he's gone about it, which is really, really interesting.
Oh, most certainly so. And again, going back to that point that has been claimed about when he told the club he wanted to leave, the other reason why I just genuinely don't think that conversation has happened, that's just my opinion, I've got no inside knowledge on that, is the fact that had that been the case, and even if the club at that point of that conversation had said, you're not going, you've got 3 years left on your contract, we want you to stay, of course we do, Liverpool could have still come with a bid. And this is the point, it's somewhere Alexander Isak and his representatives have had either mixed wires or have been led totally down the garden path by Liverpool, because it's just an absolute mess. Now, what we know is obviously he's not training. He's again said he doesn't want to play for Newcastle United again. He wants that move to Liverpool. They've been let down there because that doesn't come about without any encouragement from the Liverpool side. But again, if he's had that conversation, surely you make that known to Liverpool come April, May, and at the end of the season, that actually he's had that conversation. Newcastle case, sticking their heels in, but go on, put a little bit and see what happens. And nothing came about. Nothing came about. So again, things just don't add up for me. And obviously, the reporter who put the story out is a very good reporter, well respected. But it just seems like it's come from one side without maybe being stood up on the other side. But we'll wait and see what happens there. But I'm just a little bit doubtful about the narrative being painted there. But it's certainly going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few weeks. And we would talk there about the mood kind of changing within the squad. And I'm going to read Dan Burns' words out after the game. He said, on team spirit, it's tighter than ever. We've worked so hard to get that team spirit. We've been together for a lot of years now, but I don't think anyone has done anything at this club without each other. Nobody's done anything by themselves. It has always been a team effort, and we've achieved things by sticking together. Then Anthony Gordon, speaking to TNT, he said, it's been difficult because we're a tight-knit group. We've never really had any problems publicly, and that being the first that's happened has tested us. And I thought that was a really interesting line. We've never really had any problems publicly, so it's a problem, and it has tested us, which I think is great honesty. But you see it, we've still got that spirit and togetherness. And I just think the words from Gordon, from Byrne, definitely suggests that there isn't a way back for Alexander Isak.
You will never get a Newcastle United being successful without a tight-knit group in the dressing room. I think when you look at the squads that have had success, and Liverpool are a good example, they look at tight-knit squad as well as being very talented. I think you look at the Man City squads, and obviously we got insight into that, didn't we, with the the Amazon documentary, they were clearly a tight group that went through a lot together. This Newcastle side have been through a lot, and it's forged in the very early days of Eddie Howe's reign when, look, let's be honest, the club was heading towards relegation. We know it was. It was at a low ebb. They didn't know what was going to be brought in. And this is why the players that were brought in that January, Kieran Trippier, Bruno Guimaraes, Dan Burn, they remain fundamental, that Newcastle squad. They remain integral. And I know there's been a little bit of talk about Trippier leaving. Not necessarily this summer. There's been a little bit this summer, but in terms of previous summers and transfer windows, he remains massive for this football club in terms of his development. I did the piece with Leo Shahar for the Chronicle last week, where he spoke about how important Trippier is to his development. Now, that shows his influence doesn't just stay in the first team dressing room, goes way beyond that. And I think Byrne is exactly the same. I think Gordon has become that sort of player. Bruno, we know what he gives everyone. And again, he's kind of been used as a comparison, hasn't he, with Isak, because he was linked with a move away to big clubs, genuinely massive clubs. But it didn't happen. He didn't agitate. He stayed committed. He's been made captain. He's become a bit of a legend already. So what you've got in the dressing room now, I think, has been something that's been slowly built up and added to over the last 3 years. And it now is the tight dressing room that's been spoken about there, which is why I'm just not sure how easily they would accept Isak back into it if a move didn't happen.
They'd be professional, but it would be very, very hard. I don't think they'd be, making a space for him at the dinner table, put it that way. I mean, things like this can sort of battle test and make you better in the end. And I think that's the case. Anthony Gordon finished off in that interview with TNT Sports. And, not throwing Isak under the bus, but they're saying, look, the rest of us are working hard. We're still together. Yeah, it's a problem.
I found myself getting more annoyed as the game was going on Saturday with the Isak situation, because I was watching 11 men giving everything for the football club. And, and Alan Shearer again brought it up on Match of the Day, where he was talking about people in the stands who are paying extortionate prices to go and watch their club, putting more extortionate prices in petrol or train fares or whatever. And then you've got a guy who is just completely unwilling to even accept that he should be playing for his football club. He should be honouring his contract and going above and beyond to not do that. And I think, that started with frustration from myself watching the game, and it grew into anger towards the end of it, because I just thought, and the fans, I think, never stopped back on that side. Eddie Howe's comments about the fans, we haven't brought them up either, shows a complete understanding of the situation and the fans' mindset as well, how he spoke about back the 11 on the pitch for 90 minutes or 99 minutes or whatever it was in the end. And then when full time came, praised the players, give them support when they came over to support them, and then the narrative changed to comments that we'll not say because a chance that we'll not say because there might be children watching, but the fact Eddie said they can say what they want to say, they've earned that right, spoke volumes.
But again, it just shows you why I fully believe there's no way back. And I think he's played a really risky game as Alexander Isak. A daft game, actually, when you think about it. Like, when I actually take a seat back and I think about what's gone on, I just think, what on earth are you doing? I don't understand why he's decided to roll that dice for a move to Liverpool. Like, I just don't get why you've done it this way. You left yourself barely any time to get it, and then whatever assurances you assume they've had that a decent bid was coming down the line hasn't materialized. I mean, to do it as well the eve before Hugo Tekle was signed. Again, there's so many things you go, what on earth? What on earth? But anyway, well, let's not dwell on it. I mean, hopefully he's no longer a Newcastle United player, and that does. They have to get 2 strikers in. We'll talk about Yoane Wissa now, because Newcastle United, there was hope that this deal would be sorted by the end of last week, then movement hopefully today. But it seems like Brentford have now switched the price up to £60 million for a 29-year-old striker with a year left on his deal. And now I have been showcasing this move right from the start of the summer. I think it would be brilliant for Newcastle United, but not for £60 million. That is that extortionate. And I still think he's going to end up at Newcastle United. I think Brentford are trying their luck, and fair play to them. Why not? But I think as the weeks roll on, I don't think this is going to happen in the next week. I think this will be one that gets done as close to that window as possible. Shutting, I still think he becomes a Newcastle United player, but I think he will be closer to Newcastle United's price tag than Brentford's.
We should say we've got to be very, very careful not to be hypocritical here.
Oh, 100%.
Because Brentford, I think, genuinely want to keep him in the squad, much like in an ideal world, Alexander Isak would be kept in a Newcastle United squad. Brentford will maximise the price because they want to get the biggest fee possible for one of the prize assets, if not the biggest prize asset after Mbeumo left. He has agitated. He has reportedly refused to train. I think he's now been reintegrated into the squad a bit. So we have to be a little bit careful here, much like Newcastle United have demanded a massive fee for Alexander Isak. We have to understand why Brentford are doing this. So we have to be careful in that sense. I agree it is extortionate what they're asking for, as you say, the circumstances, the year on his contract, his age. This isn't a 22-year-old promising player who can
It's
go
not even a 24-year-old with 3 years left on his deal.
Absolutely. So, so I think, we just have to be a little bit careful with that narrative. But I agree. I think the deal will get done. I think it'll end up being closer towards a 40 million kind of with maybe add-ons. But even that, I think's a lot of money for a player with 12 months on his deal. But I agree. It gives you versatility. He's a goal-scoring threat. His statistics over the last 2 seasons have been excellent. So I think he'd be a great signing. But I think personally what Brentford are doing, they know Newcastle need a striker now. And Wissa coming in is that striker now. Whereas I think the next one, I spoke about this last week, about there may well be a bigger one come in as the second striker coming in to become first choice. So I think maybe they're just trying their luck and trying to force Newcastle's hand a little bit.
I asked people on X to get in touch, and the question was, would you walk away from the Yoane Wissa deal? I would at this point. I would give them to the end of play today and say, look, this is what we're prepared to pay, 35, 40 million pounds. The offer is there. Take it or leave it. This probably will say no, you would assume. Then just keep it on the back burner, but then actually generally go after the targets. I think you can then revisit that later in the transfer window, closer to the deadline, when Brentford actually realise 60 million pounds is far too much, and 40 million is actually not bad for a 29-year-old with a year left on his deal. But Newcastle United cannot be focusing on getting this deal done, and solely focusing over the next week when it's 50-50. It's probably less than 50-50. It's probably 60-40 Brentford at the moment, if they're going to stick hard to what they want for him. So Newcastle United, I think, over the next few hours, over the next day, at the very most, have to be strong and say, right, if you're not going to accept what we want to pay for, which I think, as we've said, is fair, we say thank you very much, and they move on, because the last thing they want to be doing is getting in the same situation as last summer with Mark Gay right till the end of the window, deal doesn't come off, and then you're like, oh dear, we haven't strengthened that position. I mean, they had cover last season.
Yeah.
You don't have cover this season in that position of a striker.
It'd be interesting to see how Brentford's stance would change if Newcastle made firm moves for other strikers, because all of a sudden, as you say, they could go, hang on, we could lose this 40, 50, 60, whatever £1 million valued player for nothing next summer. So I think that would be an interesting one to keep an eye on if Newcastle were to go for Gonçalo Ramos has been mentioned, hasn't he, as a target and under consideration. If they made a firm move for him, would Brentford suddenly, I would say panic, but maybe just adjust their stance and their view on that situation?
I think if he didn't sign an extension, they would, especially when everyone is tipping them to go down to the Championship, and they didn't look great in their opening game.
No, and that's the thing. I think it doesn't look as if he's going to sign a new deal. So do they just try and get as much from him as possible? Would there be a situation where, I don't think there would be, I'll say this now, but where Newcastle may well wait, focus their attention elsewhere, and then revisit, take the risk, and it would be a massive risk, by the way, of bringing another striker in, having Gordon as second choice, and then revisit in January. But then again, you've got the African Cup of Nations as well. No, I do as well, but I'm just trying to think of different scenarios that could play out.
But then Brentford might end up playing the Crystal Palace Mark Gay card and say, well, actually, what we'll do is we'll keep him. I mean, look, Palace did it last year. Obviously, Newcastle were in for 60, 70 million. They decided to keep him.
We should say that paid off, by the way.
Definitely. Gamble, but it paid off, because stopping in the Premier League is worth more than what they would have got for Gay. And they'll probably do the same again this season. Liverpool don't stump up the cash. They want in 45, 50 million from talk of a 35, 40 million deal on the table. But look, if Palace keep Gay and he's fit, and he'll probably want to be playing week in, week out with the World Cup coming up as well. And Palace stay up. And it's a gamble with having. And again, you lose them on a free, but you've earned the Premier League money. So Brentford might go down that route. Let me read you some of the comments, Mark, that we got in then off our listeners on X. Evan says, yes, I'm not even sure if there's anyone around for a decent price now. The Isak situation is for at least 50 to 20 million on every available striker out there, as they know we are desperate, especially with 2 weeks left of the window. Crash Bandicoot, I love that name. And the profile picture is actually Crash Bandicoot in a Newcastle United shirt. Brilliant stuff. Yes, I would try and tempt Ivan Toney back. Not the first mention of Ivan Toney in the comments. Now, we mentioned this a few weeks ago. And I mentioned it. Was it to yourself or was it to Howard? It was yourself, wasn't it? Sorry. And we both kind of said, "Oh yeah, desperation there, what have you?" But actually, Newcastle United, we have to admit, are in that kind of area. We're getting a little bit desperate. Would a loan deal for Ivan Toney be the worst idea in the world?
It wouldn't. The problem comes that any deal Newcastle do with a Saudi club would go under the microscope massively.
Do it by the rules, do it by the book. What's the issue?
And his wages over there, I think I would possibly be at the moment just beyond Newcastle's reach. By all accounts, there's some mentions and ludicrous mentions of Mitrovic being in the same situation, which would be ridiculous. Toney, in terms of the player himself, I think would be ideal for a Newcastle United forward line and would get goals on this side. It's always funny when we talk about Ivan Toney because people go back to there's the one that got away, and I'm like, but when you watched him in the 21s back then, he certainly wasn't the player he was now. He's a player who needed to go away and needed to become something different, and he's done that to his credit brilliantly. If we're just talking about the player, I think he'd be a perfect fit if the finances were right. Yeah, it could work. It is desperation, as you say, but it could work. But I'm just not sure I'd see that one happening.
I think it's an unrealistic shout. But actually, as the window and the deadline becomes closer, if Newcastle haven't sorted out this issue, it becomes maybe a bit more of a realistic option, not one that we'd necessarily want to subscribe to. But, yes, the wages are a little bit over the top. I'm sure, some part wage deal could be ironed out, and again, as long as it's done by the rules and no one can have any complaints.
Yeah, but it's not quite Chef Kikuchi on a free, is it?
No,
but,
it's not.
but no, I think it would. Yeah, if the finances were right and above board, then I think it would be a positive. We know he can score goals in the Premier League. He's Premier League proven, which Eddie loves. So but as I say, I'm just not quite sure we're at that stage yet.
The Mitrovic links, I mean, thankfully not by anybody reputable. It just seems to be some fan accounts on social media have that kind of romantic idea of Alexander Mitrovic returning to play for Newcastle United. I mean, you can throw that one right out the window straight away. We're not even going to bother discussing it. I think he probably will end up back in the Premier League as it goes, just not for Newcastle United. Blousy says 29 with 1 year left, which is not worth more than 40 million. If Brentford won't budge, then Nicholas Jackson for 55 to 60 million makes more sense because you'll still have a sell on value in 3 to 4 years. Don't be surprised to see Newcastle exploring Jackson this week if only to call Brentford's bluff. So 2 points there. The bluff, I think, is definitely something we should see in play this week in the next 24 hours, hopefully. You've kind of already alluded to it. Jackson, though, again, every time someone talks about Nicholas Jackson, there's two things that spring to my mind. Firstly, Chelsea are in that area that Newcastle United want to be, becoming an established top 4 side with the right players, maybe a cheeky title bid. They're a little bit further along, you would argue, and have to be given the money they've spent. But if Jackson's not good enough to be part of that squad, that starting 11, then why is he good enough for Newcastle United? Secondly, is that if he is good enough to be for Newcastle United, then and he's the man Eddie Howe wants, then I'll back that 100% because Eddie Howe has done absolutely nothing wrong so far on the transfer market to suggest it wouldn't be a success.
And I think this is the way we have to look at Newcastle United transfers, is that it's not necessarily what a player's done at his current club, it's what Newcastle think he could do at their club. And I think, as you say, look, there are players that have come in that Dan Burns, maybe the best example of it, admittedly a far lower cost. But when you look at it, and I don't think there was many Newcastle fans in that January window were going, let's go and get Dan Burn from Brighton.
I'll be honest, I'd never heard of him.
Yeah, I mean, from my non-league roots and stuff I had, but then, and being from Blythe and stuff, kind of got to know him through that. So I think he came in, he did a job, Eddie Howe identified him. Now, I think he's surpassed expectations at Newcastle, but, he's kind of proven worth every single penny of the 13 million, I think it was in the end. Jackson, I've got to be honest, there is a player there. I watched quite a bit of La Liga, and I was always impressed with them in La Liga. I'm just not sure you can judge anyone based on what they've done at Chelsea unless it's a Mason Mount or someone, Cole Palmer. Certainly not Mason Mount.
So Man United fans might have something to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Cole Palmer. But I just think Chelsea is that much of an... It just doesn't feel like a stable club. It doesn't feel like a stable squad. There's always changes going on. So I think with Nicholas Jackson, I think there is a player in there. I just think he needs to be... I think he's a player that Eddie could work his magic on, if I'm honest, and I think he would get something out of him and turn him into a genuine threat at Premier League level.
What about Christopher Nkunku?
No.
Straight away?
No.
Trying to get him in on loan. Chelsea rejected that, according to latest reports.
The difference is between him and Jackson, it's quite an easy comparison to make, isn't it? Where I look at Jackson and I look at some things he's done in the Premier League and his record, and I think there is a player in there that can thrive in the Premier League. And Nkunku, I'm not massively sure I've seen that. I do think he's a good player, but I think with him, I think he's maybe just more suited to the Bundesliga, which is why there's no shock that Bayern want to take him back.
And Dominic says Eddie Howe would turn Nicholas Jackson into an elite striker, but we can't sign him if we're going to sign Wissa, as we'll lose both to the African Cup of Nations. Richard says Jackson's character is suspect. Look at the fighting of wanting to take a penalty at Chelsea. Disgusting behaviour.
I don't think that happens at Newcastle, because I think there's that strong a dressing room in there. When you look at that Chelsea dressing room, I don't think there's loads of strong characters in there, whereas I think in Newcastle there is, so he'd be pulled in line straight away.
Well, Gary says, does Toney fit the character profile?
I think there's a bizarre narrative around Toney, and I'm not sure why it's come in the way it has. When I've seen him interviewed, he seems quite respectful, quite humble at times. And again, I think because he knows players in the dressing room from England and such like, I think he would again fall in line.
We've got Gary saying, let's hope the club are working in the shadows on something. Dennis with an interesting approach here says, pointless spending on hit and hopes. I'd rather we keep it until we can get what we want, which I think on one hand is sensible. You don't want to waste the money with PSR and what have you, but Newcastle are not in a position where they can finish this transfer window with sulking Alexander Isak or having sold him and then being left with Anthony Gordon and Willa Sula. That is a nightmare on the horizon if that happens. I mean, we're already fully into the first chapter of a nightmare. If that happens, it's a full book.
Yeah, it is, and it's starting to get. You mentioned the word earlier about desperation. Well, maybe not quite there yet, but there's a fortnight to go. I think it's 2 weeks today, isn't it? The window closes. Now the problem Newcastle have, well, multiple problems, but the problem with the Isak situation is that the closer we get to that, the 1st of September, the higher prices go for players they want to bring in. I think we'll probably see that a little bit with the Wissa talk today. There is a chance Liverpool could try and force a lower deal for Isak, which is a real strength of, real test of Newcastle's owner's strength here. Will they stay firm? Will they say no to 150 or nothing? Simple as that. If that is the price of set for them, obviously they're not going to come out and say that. But yeah, I think when you get into the last 2 weeks of a window, it's a very complicated environment to do deals, and that's why Newcastle have got to be really firm and really decisive, I think.
Sam Mulliner, co-host of the podcast, who will be on later this week, says Calamendo going to Forest today for around £30 million is an absolute masterstroke for them. An opportunity lost for Newcastle United. And of course, we've seen Gassand go to Aston Villa as well. And I've said on previous episodes, I think there was a market there that hasn't maybe been tapped up by Newcastle United. Their shift of transfer approach, in my opinion, is it's kind of now gone back to what we know, and that's kind of aiming for those players not quite at the elite level, like your Jacob Ramsey's, like Yoane Wissa, where there's less top teams in for them, but you can sell the project to them and a pay rise as well. And the player Sam mentions there, guest ended Aston Villa, I think fit into that kind of level that I'm talking about. And there'll be other players around Europe that fit into there. I mean, people know I'm a big fan of Carruthers, Genk, but of course the Belgian league's even lesser than Ligue 1. And obviously we've seen However, he's at the other extreme where he's quoted 80 million from Porto. But if Newcastle United do walk away from Yoane Wissa, and again, you go back to the comments I haven't read out. David says if they double their asking price in the space of 2 days, and yes, we walk away. Eric saying yes, I would say walk away if they will only accept 50 to 60 million. Unfortunately, it will be tough to find a fee that isn't inflated because everyone knows how desperate we are. Diamond says that the price is quoted today, then yes, we walk away. Brian says not a question of who is next, but who is left. Yeah, fair point. A Wild says, yep, the fee being asked is now too high. He mentions the gay saga of last summer as well. So everyone's saying walk away, but the other question is, who do you turn to next? And this is just for Callum Wilson's replacement.
Yeah, it is. It is. And the fact that they do need another as well. So that's where there's only so much money in the pot when it comes to PSR. So if they were to go big on Wissa and kind of cave in, which I don't think they will,
No.
I think there's no doubt that they won't do that. But if they were to cave in, all of a sudden that kind of leading striker that they need, the pot for that becomes even smaller unless there was a sale, which we don't want unless it was an Isak sale, obviously. So I would worry about that one. That's why I think at the moment they've got to play a little bit of a careful game with Brentford. They're not going to pay the new demands or reported new demands. But I do think the deal happens. And I think, as you said earlier, it'll happen when it will happen closer to Newcastle's sort of 40 million valuation.
If Brentford over the next few days are going to stick to that asking price, and if I was Newcastle, I would be very loud about picking up the phone to Aston Villa, Ollie Watkins. And this is what you're going to see. And I don't think Newcastle United have maybe done this too much in the open, which you might say is brilliant, you might say it isn't. But I don't think we see them play that game well enough, at least to the public eye, where you do. It is, we want that player, when in reality we don't want that player. But it's about calling the bluff. It's about forcing the selling team to think, oh my God, are we about to lose a £40 million deal yet? So hopefully we do see that over the next few days. And whether it is, Newcastle and Ollie Watkins, I suspect you will actually see quite a lot of reports and claims over the next week about who they are in for. And reality, it probably hasn't moved on from Yoane Wissa, just they don't want to pay, but are confident of getting the price down. But in terms of that striker who replaces Alexander Isak, I mean, it's impossible. It really, really is. And it's not going to be Watkins and Wissa, even though I think that would work for 2 or 3 years. Who's it going to be?
Well, the first thing we should say is you don't replace Alexander Isak, because I don't think there's too many strikers around Europe like him, or around the world like him. You have to try and find something different, because the ones that are better than him are, let's be honest, out of Newcastle's league at the moment. Financially and a number of aspects. And if one of those did come available, as much as we love Newcastle, you're probably going to see one of the giants of European football go in for them. So it's a really difficult one. Yeah, as I say, I think the Wissa deal will get done, but who is that other one? And there aren't too many options now. Ramos has been spoken about. Jackson's been spoken about. I do like Ramos. I think, again, watching him at Benfica, you could see what he offers. You don't go to PSG in that squad and do well there without being a good player. So he could be an option. But again, it goes down to price. I think there was talk of 70, wasn't there?
Well, my dad has been into the comments and he suggests 60, 70 million pounds for Alexander Isak, and then they can also give Ramos as part of the deal.
Well, it'd be interesting what Liverpool had to say about that. Yeah, and it would solve a couple of issues, wouldn't it? Yeah, it could be an option. You don't see too many part exchange deals now, do you? It's not a thing that tends to happen, but yeah, I mean, he'd certainly be capable of playing for PSG, and it could be a deal.
Well, look at that. Niall has also jumped in and said Ramos is my choice and sell Isak as part of the deal as well. And Gary says, I'd love Real Madrid PSG to come in for Isak, offload him as far away from Liverpool. Joe says, what team want Isak in the dressing room now after the saga that's gone on? And Omar says, I would sell Isak to any club except Liverpool, even make a loss. I'm not sure we'd be doing that, Omar, but your opinion is valued as ever. I mean, any names, Mark, that do spring to mind, either as a Yoane Wissa alternative or an Alexander Isak replacement? Give the people what they want.
Oh, yeah,
but the very fact that we sit here and we go, right, Jackson, Wissa, and then you go, ooh, It shows you
there's just not a lot around.
how difficult it is.
It does. And look, everyone wants a good striker, and Newcastle have one, and it's annoying. It's frustrating. It angers me that he doesn't want to play for the club, because he could have been everything he wanted to be at Newcastle United. And yeah, I mean, I like Watkins. I've got to be honest. I think Ollie Watkins would give Eddie Howe the sort of striker that Eddie Howe loves having. Working, he can link up play. He gets the scrappy goals. He gets the great goals. I'm just not sure Villa would sell him to Newcastle now the Ramsey deal's done. Again, I've said about Jackson, I still think he's quite raw, but again, I think in time Eddie Howe would mould him into something that can become a consistent threat in the Premier League. The African Cup of Nations kind of confuses things a little bit again, because as I said earlier, could you do Wissa and Jackson? I'm not sure that would happen without another striker coming in, which it's hard enough getting one, never mind three. So yeah, it's a really confusing situation. I think, again, I go back to it. I think the Wissa deal gets done at some point. And then it's who is that other one? I'll say Wissa and Ramos. That would be maybe not my guess, but that is literal guesswork. It's not based on anything.
Well, I mean, Newcastle, I think, are actively trying to get a replacement for Alexander Isak. They're just doing it sensibly and then not allowing him to move. Obviously, Liverpool need to have the bid in first off, but they're not going to sell without having a replacement for Alexander Isak, because it would just be such a gamble not worth taking. If there's any players you would like to see Newcastle United sign up top, do let us know in the comments. We're going to finish off with a brief chat about the under-21s. Newcastle faced Southampton on Sunday. They lost 2-1. Mark was there covering it. I have to say, right from the off, the starting 11 was arguably the strongest starting 11 I've seen at that level in a long, long time. Sanusi, obviously. Go on, who else did we have? Just my mind's gone blank there.
Song-Soo Park played. Lewis Hall played. There were a number of players. Harrison Ashby played. Alex Murphy started. So there were a number of Travis Herners, of course. I think I worked it out, and feel free to pick me up on this if I was wrong. But I'm fairly certain there was only one player in that starting 11 who didn't feature for the first team in pre-season, and that was Cathal Heffernan, the captain.
Yeah, I think you would be right.
So that shows the strength there. Now, it was really interesting as I got to Whitley Park, the teams came out on social media, and it was like, I looked at it and it was like, wow, okay. So, there's clearly big decisions being made. So I spoke to Robbie Stockdale, who's interim under-21s coach at the moment. And he spoke about the decision-making process on Song-Soo Park and Lewis Hall. And he said, obviously, they were both unused substitutes on Saturday. Now, if they come off the bench on Saturday, they wouldn't have featured yesterday, I don't believe. Spoke about the play Friday night at home against Chelsea, if they could be in line to play again. And he said that sort of decision won't be taken yet. We'll find out later in the week when Newcastle know what's available for Liverpool. And the decision, how Hall, for example, is, let's be honest, he's a first-team player, isn't he? I think there's a little bit of debate about where Song-Soo will go. There's a piece in the Chronicle today about that, where at the moment it's still up for debate. Personally, I think he'd be better off being part of the under-21 setup. His performance yesterday, and I said it on a post-match video that I did, showed a player still easing into life in England, still getting used to the demands, training with the first team. We shouldn't forget he played in the second tier in South Korea. He's come from out of nowhere, really, this deal. So I think we need to be a little bit patient and not show, don't get too carried away by the positives, don't get too down by the negatives. Yesterday was an off day for him. It just didn't happen, but he's an 18-year-old. He's come from South Korea. He's settling in. Lewis Hall, I thought, was solid. He gave a Lewis Hall performance. And I think, with a week of training ahead of him, I don't think he'll play Friday night. I think he'll be available for Liverpool. Whether he starts or not, I don't know. But just on a couple of the youngsters as well, Trayvon Sanusi is clearly a very, very talented player, and I think will go on to be a very good player. The likes of him, Sean Neve was excellent leading the line. For me, I think he needs to go out on loan. I think he needs an AFL loan. Whether that happens or not, I'm not sure. There's still, again, big distance to be taken on him. And the captain, Cathal Heffernan, who was I spoke to him after the game. There'll be a piece coming out later this week with him. Fascinating story. Obviously, played in Ireland, went to play for AC Milan, came to Newcastle 2 years ago last week, which is why I want to do the piece. To me, he gave every indication that he needs a loan now. He needs a good loan in the AFL. He's a defender who clearly loves defending. Yes, he can play on the ball, he can do all that side, but he just loves defending. Seems like a leader. I think he needs to go out on loan. So, although the result was disappointing, obviously losing the game, there were positives to take from the performance as well, and it'll be really interesting to see them play Chelsea on Friday night. I'll be at that one as well, just to see what side is put out and how they move on from Sunday's defeat.
You had Thompson in goal, Ashby, Hall, Murphy, Heffernan, Munda, Sanusi, Hearns, Neve, Harrison, and Song Su starting. So, like I say, a really strong starting 11. I'm fascinated to see how Grayson gets on. I'm hoping this story has the ending that we all put with those kind of shades of goal, successful creating Newcastle United following the footsteps of his dad. I mean, that could be the fourth. Is there a fourth movie goal? That could be the fourth. There's definitely three of them anyway.
It's a real funny one with Joe, because about 2 months ago, I think it was, maybe longer, I was on a night out and bumped into Paul, who obviously I know through non-league circles as well. And he told me that night, he was, Joe's got his first pro deal, and I was like, we'll have to have a chat about it. He's like, well, I don't put any pressure on him. I just want him to, go and do what he does. Look, there's unquestionably talent there, and a very, very good forward, but I just think it's a case of let's just ease off. His dad kind of showed what it takes at the top level. Paul, for all the goals he scored at kind of youth level as it was back then, I think only made 2 senior appearances, going up against the likes of Shearers and Ferdinands, we should say, but became a wonderful goal scorer in the AFL, in the non-league scene. So, yeah, I just think there needs to be a word of caution with Joe. It's a great story, but we just need to let the kid get on with it.
Thank you all. Where was he?
Yeah, so look, and I think I said this the first time I was on earlier this summer when we spoke about the schedule that the academy has this season is ridiculous. They've got the National League Cup. They started obviously with a win at Gateshead, a very entertaining win at Gateshead on Wednesday. They've got the Premier League 2, which is now underway. They've got several other competitions, the UEFA Youth League that they're going to be in, which is the youth version of the Champions League. So there's going to be a lot of rotation in the 21s this season. There was a number. Leo Shaw didn't play yesterday, and obviously they're trying to give players game time, but not burn them out as well. So I think you'll see a lot of that this season. But also, again, and this is a conversation that needs to be had. I think spoke about it for the Chronicle last week as well with Robbie Stockdale. Decisions will be taken on loans, and Newcastle's schedule. I'm kind of paraphrasing him here a little bit, but he said the schedule won't dictate the loans. The loans will be decided by if it's a good move for the player or not. So I think we may well see Qual might be one. I think Shaw should be, but it's whether or not they think he'll benefit from staying in and around. So I think there will be some movement on a few players over the next 2 weeks in terms of outgoing loans.
Well, lots to wait and see on, but just exciting to have so many players that could potentially have a future in the first team at Newcastle United. Thank you very much, guys, for tuning in. A lot of great comments in the live chat. We've got Gary and Les saying thanks for the show. Steve saying very enjoyable show. Good work, Andrew and Mark. We will be back next week. We'll be doing it on Tuesday because obviously Newcastle face Liverpool on the Monday, so we won't be on air prior to that game. We will be on air Tuesday afternoon, hopefully celebrating Newcastle's victory over Liverpool. Mark, thank you for popping on. Enjoy the rest of your week. To you guys, do head over to chroniclelive.co.uk, follow our live transfer blog. You will deal with all the latest rumours, gossip, and concrete stories when it comes to Newcastle United transfers this summer. Do hit the link in the podcast description box. Sign up to NORD VPN, support the podcast, stay connected. I will see you later this week.